Sally Lowe. Thanks, guys.
Good morning. I hope you've all had an amazing week so far and enjoying those comfy chairs. For the brief time I sat on them, I was like, these are good. We will keep these definitely. So I think I'm actually going to start with a little bit of an introduction this morning, because since I last spoke up here, the world has literally changed. We have gone through this pandemic and we've moved into our amazing new home as a church, and even personally, we've gone through like this mega season of change, so it feels really strange standing up here, and I'm probably a bit of a stranger to some of you newer people as well. So if you don't already know, I am married to Matt. He was up here earlier. He's gone down to the kids, but he's normally obviously guitar in hand, singing his heart out. And we met many, many moons ago at Liberty, back when it was at Redcastle School. And we've been married now nearly 17 years. That's a long time to put up with my cooking. The man deserves a medal. But not just for my cooking, because as well as being a wife, I am a mum to our 9-year-old son, Reuben, and Reuben is my mini-me. We are both crazy, daydreaming animal lovers, and we have a tendency to forget what we're doing and where we're going, and I think between us, we really do test his patience. Because Matt's personality traits are quite the opposite of mine, so I think that gives him the raw end of the deal, especially when there's a multiple of me. So Matt is articulate, methodical, slow, and calculated in his decision-making and acting on things. And I'm scatterbrained and impulsive. I jump into things and emotionally invest and commit far, far quicker than he would ever want to. And my decision-making, in comparison to him, is like lightning fast. But I'm also quite flippant. I can change my mind on things just like that, as can Reuben. So you can imagine, from his perspective, living with us is not always the easiest. But if we dig a little bit further, our differences don't end there. Because Matt and I couldn't have come from a more different background. He was raised in a Christian home in Bury St Edmunds, and he had 2 siblings, and he actually came to school here in Thetford at the grammar school. I know. Ooh, fancy. Whereas I was brought up in a broken atheist home in Watton. I lived as an only child, and I went to Wayland High School, sometimes known as Wayland Prison. I didn't actually go to prison, I will just point out. Matt studied a neuroscience degree. He was a production manager for many years in an engineering firm, and currently he's a mortgage advisor. Whereas I dropped out of sixth form. That's, I think it's your last 2 years of high school if you're American. And then I realized I am absolutely terrible at administration. And when you don't have any qualifications, that's one of the very few things I could go into. So I enrolled as a mature student. I wasn't that mature, I was 20. It's not that bad. And did an arts-based degree, and then later set up my photography business. So quite a difference. Matt loves playing sports. Obviously, I don't. He finds finance and politics interesting. I mean, really, who does? He cooks pizza from scratch, and he smokes meat as a hobby because he's so passionate about food. I mean, seriously, it's an entire separate extra love language for him. The poor guy. I do cook, by the way. We'll just say it's a bit hit and miss. I'll leave it there. I like yoga. He finds it tedious. I love riding horses. I think he would rather smoke one. And if I read for fun, it's probably fantasy or animal-based because that's what I'm most passionate about. And I think Matt lives with more animals than he would like to. Even medically speaking, our brains are actually wired differently. He's considered neurotypical, and I am considered neurodiverse. So we are chalk and cheese. Like, seriously, chalk and cheese. But somehow, after 18 total years together, I still consider him my best friend, the love of my life, and my knight in shining armor. And we all need one of those, don't we? So perhaps you might be thinking, she's either a bit of an oversharer or she might be talking about marriage. And you'd be correct on both counts. But I do have a disclaimer before I go on, because in all honesty, it has nothing to do with the timing of Valentine's Day. We got together as a team and we were mapping our year ahead, and I was like, I know I'm speaking in February, but I will not be speaking about marriage. Like, I don't have an idea or a concept, and it's a huge subject to do in 30 minutes on a morning. And actually, it can be really, really, really complicated. So I was like, no, definitely not. And then I went to bed, trying to get to sleep, just minding my own business, and boom, this idea just like dropped in to my mind, and I just couldn't let it go. And I was like, God, you are a genius. Still doesn't mean I want to speak about marriage. But here I am, and my hope and prayer for you this morning, whatever season you are in, is that something will be relevant, and if not even for now, maybe for the future, or even for a family member or friend who needs your help. So my title for today, if you need a title, is Invest Wisely. So just taking you back to our differences for a minute. You might think that list was pretty vast, but we are chalk and cheese in so many ways. It's unbelievable. We sleep differently, we shower differently. As weird as that sounds, we actually do. We eat differently, we deal with conflict differently, we approach near enough every project differently. Our love languages, they're different, obviously. And we discovered this year, in the last year, we even mow the lawn differently. Hands up if you've ever mowed the lawn in here, and keep them up for me. And then put them down if you mow the lawn in straight lines up and down your garden. I know. Those of you who just put your hands down, you're probably thinking, how else would you mow the lawn? Exactly. It was probably really annoying you to know that some of us use the lawnmower like we use the Hoover. There is no order. It's chaos and spontaneous. And I love it. And Matt can't be in the garden if I am mowing the lawn. He's like, I'm out of here. My brain can't handle it. So whilst all these differences could be perceived as maybe making us a bit incompatible, maybe a little bit doomed to fail, it does make our marriage really tricky to navigate. But it's the very few things that we do have in common that make it work in spite of those differences. So what do we have in common? I'm not kidding when I say it is a small list. We have a shared sense of humour, a similar taste in music and film choice, and if we went on a holiday, probably quite similar. And although Matt lives with more animals than he'd like to, he does like them, so that's okay. But probably the most important things for us, the two most important things, common grounds that we have, is first of all that we love God and we're committed to building this church, which gives us a shared belief system across many areas. And secondly, because of that belief system, we have a long-term mindset when it comes to marriage. We vowed till death do us part, and that influences most, if not all, of the decisions that we make. And those things have kept us together for a total of just over 18 years so far. And not just together, but actually happy, which is great. As much as it kills me to admit it, I'm quite glad he's not in here. One of the most useful things I've ever seen in a magazine, I don't read many, was actually from one of his Financial Times. And obviously I didn't read it, and I'd probably be smarter if I did. But it was just a little anecdote in the margin, and it said this: marriage is an investment that pays dividends if you pay interest. If you don't know, a dividend is a regular payment of profits paid to its shareholders, according to Google. So to have a long-term mindset of growth in any area, not just marriage, we have to make regular and consistent investment. And before you all switch off, because I said the word dividends, I probably would if I was in your shoes, this morning I'm going to continue with something much simpler, because I'm going to leave the finance to Matt. Jesus liked to talk about plants and trees all the time. So if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. So marriage is like the humble plant or tree, and when it's in the right conditions, when it's been regularly and consistently tended to or invested in, it has roots that grow deep and making it strong and allowing it to flourish. So we can understand, for marriage or any area that we want to grow long-term, investment equals strength. But you all know that. So here on the screen next is my longest surviving plant. I don't know if you can see it from here. As you can tell from the laughter, if you know me or you've heard me speak, I can't be trusted with plants. This one is my coffee bean plant, and it's 4 years old. It's lived with me for 4 years. That's a miracle. And from this, you might think, well, it doesn't look that bad. Maybe she's invested in it a bit. Oh, no, you would be wrong. The next picture is the front angle. This poor plant is hanging on for its dear life. I've not invested in it. I mostly ignore it, and then every so often it looks like this. I'm such a bad person. And I realise it's on the brink of death, and I have to throw some water at it and hope that it will revive itself, and usually it does. But I've definitely not invested in it. In fact, I think my negligence is gambling on its survival, because this poor plant, it's alive, but it's not reaching its potential. In fact, when I was preparing for this message, I actually researched it, and I found out, aside from the fact that I'm a very bad person, that it has the ability by 4 years of age to have grown to 5 foot tall or more and be producing cherry-like fruit with little coffee beans inside, if it has been tended to and regularly invested in. But it has not. It's weak, it's sparse, it's bedraggled, even when it doesn't look like that. And it's leaning at a funny angle, and if I turn it, it doesn't correct itself. People tell me, oh, it's fine, it will just grow. No, it doesn't. It's past that. It's never going to produce fruit, and at this point, it's not really even fulfilling its primary purpose that I bought it for, which was to decorate my home. In contrast, though, I've redeemed myself a little bit. This next one is an autograph tree. And it's remained quite healthy so far, because from the start I've paid attention to the instructions and I kept them. And I found out, where in the house does it like to be? How much sunlight does it need? What temperature does it need to stay at? How damp does the soil need to be? So how often do I need to water it and fertilize it, etc.? And I've tended to those needs as best as I can so that it can thrive. Because just like us, different plants have different needs, and it's important to learn them. So I've invested in its care regularly, and it's healthy for the moment. And it'll only remain healthy as long as I continue to invest in it. Now, I don't have an actual fruit tree in my garden, because if I did, it would not be bearing any fruit. It might even die. You'd think in the garden they'd be safer. They're not. But I've been doing my research, and I really like cherry trees, and even more since I've started researching them. And so on the screen will be a nice, strong, healthy cherry tree, far, far away from my garden of doom. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because within our marriages, when the conditions are right, it's healthy, we've continuously invested and tended to them, obviously we hope to flourish and bear fruit. And a tree, it doesn't have to bear fruit, but it's advantageous if it does. So the cherry tree knows that its ultimate overarching goal is not just to survive, but to thrive. It wants to grow strong, it wants to reach its full height, maximum growth, so that it can produce not just one, but many good crops in its lifetime. So it has strategies for long-term growth. And its long-term growth is actually more important than it producing fruit. So just quickly, what do I mean by fruit in relation to marriage? Well, it's anything that we put our time and energy into producing. And usually it's part of our purpose. So it could take the form of jobs, creating businesses, ministries, family, volunteer work and serving, hobbies, your home, all of these kind of things. But to do these well, as individually and as a couple, and ensure that our marriage thrives in the process, it requires us to invest wisely. Because bearing fruit, it has a cost. It uses up our time and energy and probably some of our finance And we only have so much of that to give. So we need to be long-term thinkers like the tree. So it has 4 strategies to maintain long-term growth. So the first one, to bear good fruit, it needs to have strong established roots. So it might not produce fruit for anywhere between 2 to 5 years until it's mature enough to take on that burden. If it did bear fruit too soon, it might put a drain on its resource and stunt its growth. You know, the weight of that fruit would be quite a lot for its underdeveloped branches. It would put a strain on it and probably its growing root system. So it has a long-term mindset. It doesn't want to take on too much too soon. It doesn't want to walk before it can run. It wants roots before fruits. The early season of marriage is undoubtedly one of the hardest because there is so much to learn about each other. And as you can imagine, our first year was really tough. We learned very quickly that our personality traits, our skill sets, our backgrounds were so vastly different that it meant we clashed a lot when we approached things, which was stressful. It took time to learn how to live alongside each other and to make those differences complement each other. We had to work hard to turn chalk and cheese into something a bit more like yin and yang. And to be honest, we were really lucky that we rented and that we were quite poor, because it meant there was very little we could actually invest and commit to. It kind of stopped us right there, which was good, because knowing me, I would have jumped in. And when I was prepping, I was thinking about examples, and I just thought, you know, one of our long-term whimsical dreams is to build our own home. And if that opportunity had arisen in like our first couple of years, knowing me, I would have been like, yes, we are doing this. And I would have dragged us both headlong into an absolute disaster. Because if anyone's watched Grand Designs, you'll know building a house is stressful. Moving, stressful. Building, layers upon layers of stress. And we would not have been ready for that. Not at all. Those roots would have been ripped right out. So actually, I'm really grateful that was something we never had an opportunity to do. So to thrive long-term in marriage, we need roots before fruits. The second fail-safe strategy of the tree is that if it's ever sick or conditions aren't right, it's going through difficulty, it will hold back its fruit production so that it doesn't drain too much from the tree and therefore threaten its future growth. So as far as the cherry tree is concerned, fruit is never more valuable than the tree. So in times of sickness or difficulty, it's wise to hold back so we can hold each other up. And sometimes that sucks because we've got dreams and we've got plans and we just want to, crack on with those things. And we have to remember that we vowed in sickness and in health. And for us, we had a season in our marriage, early doors, where I was struggling with something physically and my body needed treatment and it took a long time. And it was really tough for us and probably some of our darkest days as a couple because we still had a lot to learn. But we were at that age where everyone wanted to know, when are you having a baby? It was constant. And it was such a pressure for us. But actually, we knew and we made that decision. You know what? For us right now, that just can't happen. We have to hold back and hold each other up until we get through this season. And I think that was probably one of the wisest decisions we made early on for us personally. We had to remember that fruit is never more valuable than the tree. It was like 7 years, I think, before we made that decision. We were like, yeah, I think we can just about cope now. So the third of the tree strategies is called the June drop. If you're a gardener in here, you might have heard it called something else, but for now we're going with June drop. When the tree is mature and healthy, during springtime, pollination occurs. The tree can't actually control that at all. So if the bees have been extra busy and loads of pollination takes place, then funnily enough, around June time, the tree will do a June drop, which means before that fruit has had the chance to deplete any of its resources, it will discard like up to 30% and get rid of them so that it's not overburdened. And that way it can maintain the health of the tree, which is its goal. because fruit is never more valuable than the tree. So just like that, there are things that aren't worth us investing our time and energy into, and we've got to be willing to just drop them before they overburden us. You know, when we had Reuben, we had to make some June drops, as any parent will know. There were things that we had to let go of, hobbies, areas of serving, and our social life was thinned down. But we had to make that sacrifice so that we could continue to invest in us and in our crazy little fruit. We had to be realistic about what time and energy and finance was available to us so that the long-term consequence wasn't that our marriage suffered. So what about the ripened fruit? I'm going to touch on that before we go on to our last point. Because fruit has two purposes, really. Its flesh brings vital sustenance and support to the community. And importantly, its seed carries the tree's legacy. So the tree is wisely investing its resource and energy into the community without compromising the tree. And the heart or motive behind that is to ensure the security of the future generations. What an example. I'm like, that's amazing. I love it. The reason it produces any fruit at all is provision for the community and provision for future generations. I'd like to think that when Matt and I are like old and grey and wrinklier than we are now, we'll see that our partnership has impacted the community and hopefully the world positively. I think that would make me a very happy little old lady. But to do that, we have to learn from the tree what the final strategy is. And it knows that to fulfill its fruit-bearing purpose, sustaining community and ensuring a future generation of trees, that fruit has to leave the tree. It has to be willing to let the fruit go, because fruit is temporary. Which is why it's so careful with its resources to begin with. It wants to produce the tastiest, the best smelling fruit possible so that it can guarantee that a nice little bird like this one is going to come and gobble it up and take that seed to a place that the tree can't go. And when that happens, it can establish in its own right and flourish. It doesn't want to overburden itself and spread itself too thin, because what it does produce, it wants to be its absolute best. It seems obvious, right? But sometimes it can be really hard to let go of the things that we put our time and energy into producing. I'm going to pick on finance as an obvious one. When we work hard to produce finance, we don't always want to let it go for the greater good. But actually parting with some of it, giving to food bank, the local church, community projects, even global humanitarian and conservation projects, can achieve far more than it can sitting in our bank account or buying our next takeaway. When we don't let go of that fruit, a bird doesn't come and gobble it up, it's going to drop, and it's either going to spoil in that spot, or if it does manage to germinate, it will live under the shade of that tree. So it's not going to reach its full potential. So even our finance, the smallest amount that we can give a seed, has potential to do good in our community and this world. What about businesses? Because that seems like something you should hold on to, right? Well, over the years, my business has grown, and with Matt's support and encouragement, I managed to establish it. And I got to the point where I had to make a decision. If I was willing to part with some of it, someone else could benefit and enjoy what I'd worked hard to produce. And if I was willing to relinquish control, it could go further than I could take it. So now, I have an incredible business partner who has taken my fruit and re-established it, and it's in the process of becoming something even greater than it was before. But only because I was willing to let it go. I could have kept my business name and allowed her to just be a second shooter, always keeping her in my shadow, but it might have failed to grow more than it already had, and it wouldn't have allowed Lacey to reach her full potential. So instead, we rebranded, we created a new venture together so that she could flourish in her own right and be my equal. But if I tried to control it and micromanage it, she would have just suffocated, and it wouldn't have worked, because I had to let go of my fruit. Let's think about children. This is a big one. Psalm 127, verse 3 says, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward." It's not always easy to remember when you haven't slept a whole night's sleep in 2 years or 3. But they naturally require time and effort, probably more so than any other fruit in our world. They are a 24/7 fruit production. They require constant mental, physical, financial, and emotional investment from us for a really long time. So more than ever, we have to be longer-term thinking to preserve our marriages. So fruit is temporary and never more valuable than the tree. So they should never take precedent over our marriage, because they're a season that will eventually come to an end. That's the aim. Our job as parents is to make them tasty enough that when they're ripe and ready to leave, they're going to be completely independent of us, and they'll be able to exist far enough away that they can reach their potential, grow to their fullest, and produce their own good fruit. So for the last 2 years, Reuben has been adamant that he is going to Texas. He's an explorer and a dinosaur lover, and he knows, because he's done his research, that Texas is where paleontologists make the best living. So he's like, that's where I'm going. So already at 9 years old, he's setting his sights far off, unless he changes his mind flippantly. It could happen. It could happen. But potentially, he's only with us for a finite amount of time. So it would be easy for me to overly invest in him, to give him everything, my whole heart, all of my energy, all of my time, because I've only got him for a short season. Whereas Matt, he agreed to forever. I could just put him first later, right? But if I do that, my marriage is going to become like my coffee bean plant. That's not good. I would have waited until it was so parched and on the brink of death that I'd just be throwing stuff at it in the hopes that it might survive. But in that time, it wouldn't have grown, it wouldn't have flourished, and I might have damaged its chances of ever bearing fruit again. And sadly, this is happening a lot. You know, there are so many marriages that are failing after 20 or 30 years when the kids have left home because they've realised there's nothing left. They've not invested and prioritised in each other through that long season. Proverbs 22 verse 6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." Obviously, our job as a parent is to teach our children, and it takes a lot out of us. But sometimes I think we can forget that a lot of the life skills that we teach our children earlier on are from the example that we lead in our marriages. So we're going to go to Ephesians 5, 22 to 28, and this is from the Message version. I love this version. It says, "Wives, understand and support your husbands in ways that show your support for Christ. The husband provides leadership to his wife the way Christ does to his church, not by domineering, but by cherishing. So just as the church submits to Christ as he exercises such leadership, wives should likewise submit to their husbands. Husbands, go all out in your love for your wives, exactly as Christ did for the church. A love marked by giving, not getting. Christ's love makes the church whole. His words evoke her beauty. Everything he does and says is designed to bring the best out of her, dressing her in dazzling white silk, radiant with holiness." That right there is a beautiful picture of what a healthy marriage should be. And it's also an example of a lot of investment. But it's necessary because where our children first learn how to respect other people, other men and women in their world, it's really from us as parents. They learn that from us. From our marriages, they watch how we treat each other, how we carry each other through the storms. They learn kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, respect, how to deal with conflict effectively, how to be good stewards, how to love like Jesus did. All through the example of our marriage. Because if we can't be kind to the ones we love, if we can't be good, faithful, encouraging, merciful, and honest, how can we really be that to strangers, and how can they? So our marriage, if it's healthy and flourishing, if we've put roots before fruits and know that it's never more valuable than the tree, is a highly valuable tool in teaching and preparing our children. So it's important that we prioritize it and regularly and consistently invest in it. If we don't want to become another statistic, we need to remember that fruit is temporary. Because the only person on the planet that you will stand up in front of witnesses and commit to a legally binding contract, a lifelong one of love, is with your spouse. And some vows actually state forsaking all others, or forsaking all things, any fruit in your world. And as hard as it is, because we love them so much, that does include our children. They are a wonderful consequence of that binding contract, but the contract isn't with them, because they're always meant to leave. So if we put our children first ahead of our spouses, they become our primary source of love and fulfillment. And in doing so, not only can it damage our marriage, but it can actually stifle their independence. That's a big burden to put on them. And if we force them to put roots down too close to ours, well, then they're going to compete. That's going to cause instability in us and them. And unfortunately, as an example, I have a family member who married quite late in life, and children was something that was denied to her previously. And so, of course, naturally, it was important, and she wanted it to happen as soon as physically possible. But the promise of fruit was more important than the roots that they needed to establish, and more important than the tree. So once there, of course, that child became the primary focus, and an unhealthy codependence developed. The marriage was neglected, it's full of strife and unhappiness, and I genuinely don't know if that child will ever leave home, and if they do, what they're going to do, because they don't have the life skills they need to look after themselves. I know that's a really extreme example and a heartbreaking one, but it just highlights why it's important. We need to put roots before fruits, and we need to remember that fruit is temporary, so it's never more valuable than the tree. We've been married for 16 and a half years, and the last 4 years particularly, we have had a stormy season in our life. Matt had to go through a transitional time with work, and it took a long, long time. And it was a massive strain on him, and therefore us. And in that time we moved, we went through the pandemic. Thanks to the pandemic, my income was cut by 70%. Then he moved his job finally, and his income was cut by 50%. That's a lot to contend with. And on top of that, we had a family loss. We went through a traumatic and tragic situation at home, and I've had other health things along the way. So it's been a long old season. And we had to do some June drops to ensure the longevity of our marriage, and we had to hold back so we could hold each other up. So in this season, it doesn't really feel like we've produced much outward fruit. And for a little while, I felt really sad about that. But then I kind of realised that what we did produce in this season was a stronger marriage, which is more valuable, because we've had to trust God and dig deep, bearing with each other in love, being patient even when it's hard, and there have been some hard times. But I've come to the realization that we are coming out of this difficult season with something better than we went into it with. And actually, it was worth all the hardship, because now we're better equipped for the seasons ahead of us. But to do that, we had to tend each other diligently to maintain the health of our marriage. And we committed to holding each other up. So it's crazy to think that only 16 and a half years in, I feel like we're getting a little bit closer to that yin and yang that we were aspiring to. But ultimately, we know that if our marriage became unstable, that would impact Reuben. He's a sensitive soul. So it was and is in his best interest that we keep prioritizing and tending to our marriage, because we want a child who's independent, to be confident in himself and ready to leave and set off on his own adventures, whatever they are. But it doesn't mean that he won't care about us anymore or that we've lost him. It just means we've done a good enough job to love him and send him off, encouraging him and preparing him to follow his dreams and reach his potential. So just like the cherry tree, for marriage to thrive, not just survive, we need our long-term mindset. We need to put roots before fruits. We need to be prepared to hold back and hold each other up, and to make June drop sacrifices. And above all, remember that fruit is temporary and never more valuable than the tree. I'm just going to pray quick. Father, I thank you